is up, everybody? Sven Diesel here. We're going to be tying up a D2 bunny leech. The reason we call it that is because we use 2 dubbing loops. It's kind of a fun technique. But first, let's get started what we're going to be doing. This is a new product by Spawn Fly Fish. This is one of their 60-degree shanks. You can see how it's a shank, but the head is at a 60-degree angle. They also come at a 90-degree angle. Makes it really easy to make an articulation point on a fly. I'm going to be using this as kind of a short strike little bait fish pattern, and we're going to be using some nano silk in a 3/0. You want to make sure to use a little bit of a heavier thread for this because we are going to be using dub loops to make the body, and we want it to be super durable. So let's just go ahead and start our thread. This is an Arex hook, NS122 in a size 4, and we'll work our way down the shank of the hook to give us a little bit of a grip along that shank, and then we'll go ahead and trim out our excess tag end. And for this, we're going to be using some Magnum rabbit strips. That's going to be kind of the zonker style to this bunny leech. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these strips and do about 2 to 3 times the length of this rear, which would be the trailer hook, I guess, but in this case it's our main hook. And you can see we're just going to measure it out, just double check it, and then I'll go ahead and separate the hair here and trim it to minimize the waste. I'll take that same end, making sure that we got the hair going back off of this, and I'll kind of trim it to a point to help with the taper. These Magnum strips are a little bit thicker than your regular strips, and so that's kind of a little trick to get that tail to taper real nice. Now, I don't want to have the tip of this end up right with the hook eye, and so I'm going to give myself about 1/4 of an inch of play here, so I got enough to tie it off, and I'll go ahead and measure where that intersected my thread, poke it through the hook, take my hook out of the vise, and then adjust that strip down, because this is going to be riding hook point up. You have the option of going hook point up or down. I'm choosing to have it ride hook point up, and so we're putting this rabbit right here on the top. I'll separate where that hook point intersected the strip, and I'll kind of pinch it right where my thread is, and then pull this hair back. I'm trying to minimize the amount of hairs we trap down. I'll do 2 loose wraps, kind of making sure that that hide grips around that hook, and then I'll slide it kind of into place and do 1 or 2 more wraps. But then our real tension on this is going to be the wraps in front of it, and I'm going to pull down, fold this hide back, and then do a bunch of wraps right here in front of this hide to kind of suck it into those 4 wraps we did over the hide. And there we just tightened it up, and it's going to be very durable. And so we're going to go ahead and make our dubbing loop roughly 3 to 4 inches, and we'll advance our thread back up to the hook eye, making sure that our dubbing loop is right there at the butt of where that hide intersects the hook shank. Now I'm using the Stonfo Roto Elite dubbing tool. I really like it because you can spread it open with less tension and insert materials into it. It makes it a lot easier to do dubbing loops. But for this, we're using a new product by Spawn Fly Fish as well. This is their UV simi seal, and this has a lot of UV properties to it. I believe the base layer is just the traditional black simi seal, and it's got some UV flash or something in it that makes it glow naturally under UV light. So I'm going to take a hefty clump here because this is our only body, and we're going to be putting it in a dub loop, which means it's going to be a little bit sparser than what we traditionally would get if we were to wrap a chenille or something like that. But I vertically stacked it, just kind of making sure all those fibers are aligned, and then I'll go ahead and, with tension on this dubbing loop, spread it out evenly, using up the 3 to 4 inches that you have, and then I will go ahead and spin it until it looks pretty good. I don't know how many times this spins, because on this dubbing tool it gets really, really quick, and I'll brush it out, making sure that I'm trying to minimize the amount of fibers that got trapped. If you've got like kind of a bulk spot, you can brush that a little heavier, and then we'll do a little bit of Z cement down here to just kind of hold everything together. Be careful when you're doing this because I like to apply it while it's still wet. That way there's a little bit of glue securing this whole thing together, and as I wrap my way around, you want to make sure not to get that glue on your fingers, but I'll just kind of preen those fibers in this dubbing loop backwards the best I can. And that way we're not wrapping over the top of what we previously wrapped, and I'm not trapping, I'm trapping a little bit of fibers, but trying to minimize that for sure. And we're trying to bond these fibers and the thread all to the hook shank at this point. So that's why I like to apply it wet. You could wait for it to dry, or there's several other techniques you could use for this body, but this dubbing's pretty cool. It's new, so figured why not use it with the shank. And so we'll get up here to the hook eye, making sure not to crowd it, because we still have to tie off that zonker style magnum strip. And I found that I like to tie this off on this rear section rather than run the hide all the way to the front of the bait fish, just because it's personal preference. When the rabbit hide dries, it shrinks a little bit, and so all my flies were bent. And so this way we're able to minimize that. That's just an OCD-ness on my part, but we'll go into that a little bit more. And so brush out that body. You've got that super Z-cement down, and it's in a secure dubbing loop with that GSP thread. And so now I'll just pull my zonker, this magnum strip, over the top. So we've got our zonker right here. You could fish this as is. Wouldn't ride very well because the hook points up and we didn't counterbalance it. But I like to tie the end off here with 2 wraps over the top and then in front, and then trim it out. By doing so, you create, you don't lose as much of the hair if you were to pre-trim it. And that way we have a really nice profile. It will blend really nice into the front hook the front shank, and be really, really nice. And so I'll just secure that down with some nice thread wraps. It is a magnum strip, so there is going to be a little bit of bulk on this head. And so I'm just going to do a 3-turn whip finish, trying to make that as clean as possible, but we're not going to ever see it. And so, don't spend 5 to 10 minutes on making sure this is a pretty head. I'm just going to slap some UV resin on that to secure it so that it's nice and durable. And the last thing I want is for that thread to come undone on when a fish bites it and accidentally hooks that spot. So there we go. That's the rear section. Look at that UV stuff kind of glow. This is going to be really killer, and I really like this. So like I said, this is mainly what I'm going to use it for is targeting short strikes where they're hitting the tail, because you can see that hook sits way back in there. But here is the front body. So what we're doing here is we're determining placement. You could have it right hook point up, hook point down. I'm going to have it right hook point up, and so I want the jig on this hook eye to be up as well. And you can see right there, it's a really nice wiggle articulation. It's going to be super durable and secure. These are stainless steel shanks, and it's on a salt rated hook, and so this thing could be last at least 2 fish. No, I'm kidding. It probably would last quite a number of fish before I don't even know if this would ever break, but you never know. Anyway, so we're going to go ahead and start our thread now on this shank that we got it secured in the vise, and I'll go ahead and close that gap off and then work my thread back to where it starts to open up, and then advance my thread up to the bend. And here we're going to be tying in some lead eyes. I believe these are large, and I'm going to tie them on the underside. There is theory that it doesn't matter on a jig hook, because as soon as you strip it, it's going to naturally turn it the way we want. But with that hook point up, I want to make sure I've got plenty of weight on the underside, causing it to ride the way I want it to ride, which is hook point up. And so we're just going to secure these lead eyes with 15 to 20 wraps, crisscross, zigzagging, making sure that those are perpendicular to the hook shank. If it's twisting one way, do the wraps the opposing direction in a crisscross manner, and it will straighten them out. And then I always finish with some over-under wraps. And then we will, of course, just make sure they're straight and they look good and they're flat. And that way we are going to have it swim really, really nice. Just apply a little bit of Z-cement, and looks like I got a little bit of rabbit hair on this. Let me get that out of the way. And I'm just going to apply it here to the dumbbell eyes, making sure that it's going to be secure and stay in position until we get this fly finished. Excuse me. And then I apply a little bit up the bend of the shank there, so I can advance my thread and close that gap just a little bit more, to try and hide it just a little bit. But you can see it's nice and open, and we're going to be adding some dubbing in a really thick body here to close that and hide that articulation point. So what I have here, and this is why I don't do the one strip across the back, I'm going to actually basically do what I did the first time. I'm going to have a little tag in, go back up and over that. Now I want to make sure I measured it out that it doesn't foul into the hook point. We're not trying to create a weed guard or something that's going to limit that. The hairs are going to go around it, but the hide has a good 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch before that hook point. But what this is going to do is it's going to build up our profile. It's also going to allow me to let this dry in normally, and it's going to not bend in half or at an angle and almost look like it does now when that rabbit hide dries. It will shrink. So this is the solution I have for that. Not necessary. You could run the hide all the way up to the head if you want, but I really like how this creates kind of a secondary taper, which adds basically more profile and more bugginess to it. Now this is the D2 bunny leech because we're doing 2 dubbing loops. So I'm going to use my Stoneful Elite tool here for the first dubbing loop, and I'm going to set it to the side, and then I'm going to make a second dubbing loop here and close it off. And you could bypass this by making your own dubbing brushes, or if you're really skilled and can put rabbit and simi seal into one dubbing loop, you could do that as well. But this is a way I found to just get a really good mix, and so I'm just using a weighted dubbing tool here. And the first step is we got to form our simi seal dub loop. And so I'm just going to do the same process as before. I'm grabbing almost the same amount of material, if not just a little bit more, that we did for our rear section. And I'm just stacking, aligning those fibers, and then vertically stacking them so that it will spread out in the dubbing loop really easy. You can see right there, we got them mostly aligned. So I'll go ahead and insert that into the dubbing loop, and then holding tension on it with the weight in my pinky, I'll just go ahead and spread those out as even as possible, and then kind of adjust it, give myself a little bit of playroom between the shank and the beginning of the material, and then I'll just spin that weight in my finger, and then watch as it naturally starts to turn, and as it starts to turn, then I will spin it a little bit more and get it to the point that we can brush it. And so I'm just using that, wrapping it over my finger to keep tension and brush it out. If you got a ton of fibers, just start over again. If you're brushing it out and all the fibers are coming out, you could also use a like a low tack wax or something else that would assist you in that. But usually you just got to spin it a few more times. Now, this is where it gets a little difficult doing 2 dubbing loops. You want to make sure that you have some way of holding this. I'm actually struggling right now because I can't find my hackle pliers that I was planning on holding this. And so I'm just going to keep this dubbing loop in my pinky. And then we're going to take a crosscut section of rabbit strip. It's a little easier to do this with the crosscut because the fibers are already coming sideways off the hide. And I'm going to use this little hair clip here. This is a Swiss clamp, I believe it's called. And I'm just going to clamp a good 3 inches, 2.5 inches of this rabbit and cut it off the hide. And then we can see we have them naturally right there. We've got they're aligned. We've got some of the under fur to create a little bit of bulk. And I'm just going to insert that into that first dubbing loop we made and keep tension on it. That is the key at this point. I dropped. You don't want to do that. So while I'm keeping tension with that rabbit so it doesn't go anywhere, I'm going to untangle my other dubbing loop that's still on this weight, and then I'm going to go ahead and hold that out of the way. And it took a little bit of the rabbit. You can see this isn't the easiest technique. Making a dubbing brush would be a lot easier, but then I'll go ahead and spin that now that our semi-seal dub loop is out of the way. and then we've got 2 dubbing brushes or dubbing loops right there. I'm just going to hold them together, and then I'll take them off of the tools we're using and just hold them here in my fingers, and then I'll begin to just twist it with my fingers. So I'm twisting those 2 dubbing loops together, and you can see how it just really blends those 2 together and creates a really, really, really nice, basically a dubbing brush. But we're just using 2 dubbing loops here that are both GSP. So it's kind of a not the easiest technique, but if you don't have a dub brush table or ability to make a dubbing brush, this is how I found to do it. So it looks really, really good and blends that dubbing in with the natural material. So let's go ahead and start spinning this around, and I'm just as I wrap these 2 together, I'm still pinching it at those 2 points, and then as I wrap it up and around, I kind of twist it a little bit to keep them intertwined, because as you wrap around, you tend to you're losing that twist that you gave it, and so you want to make sure you're still twisting it the same way each time you come around. And then as you get there to the head, you want to make sure that you come on this underside to cover those lead eyes, and then I kind of wrap under, and then I'll tie it off right there over the top. So it's kind of a messy little technique, but you use what you got, and the results are pretty freaking sweet. So I'll go ahead and trim out that excess material there, now that I got a couple wraps secured right there on that 60-degree shank eye, and we'll make sure to get both threads, and then we will preen everything back and do some wraps to clean this up. We're going to kind of make it a little bit of a clouser nose, if you would call it that. I don't know if there's a more appropriate name, but we'll bring this hide that we tied in earlier up and over, and then we will simply just tie it right there at our bend, and that is it. And we've got a little bit of room here to work with now, and so this will be a little bit easier. I'll just trim out this hide and then clean it up into that hook eye, and that will create our nose. So just go ahead and trim it as close as you can to your thread. If you got a little bit of extra, that's okay. And we will just now blend this in with our thread wraps, doing really nice tension, and we will cover this whole thing in UV resin, but we've got plenty of wraps there holding that rabbit magnum hide. And so we'll go ahead and do a 3-turn whip finish now, and the rest is up to the resin. So we'll go ahead and trim off our thread at this point, and we will grab just a thin resin, something that will absorb into the thread. We'll probably put on several coats just because I want it to be a real clean head and let it penetrate in. This is also how we're going to clean up our inconsistencies. You could do more thread wraps to make it a little bit smoother, but I'm just going to cheat and use the UV resin with this. So we're just putting a generous coat in. It's going to soak in. We've got a few stray fibers, which I'll show you a trick to get rid of those if those bother you. And so we'll cure those up for 5 to 10 seconds, but we're going to be hitting this a bunch more. And so I'm just going to do a soft cure, and then I'll grab a lighter, pull all the fibers back, and just hit it real quick with the lighter, and you can see it sucked all those other fibers that were bugging me back in and burned them off. And then we'll go ahead and resin again, and I'm thinking we're going to need about 3 coats. I could have been a little bit better with the thread and tapering that and making a cleaner nose or head on this. So but that's basically this articulated bunny leech. Like I said, it's the D2 because we use 2 dubbing loops to blend that rabbit and the simi seal from the UV semi seal together. There's other techniques you could use to do that, but kind of made it a little bit fun and a little bit more challenging. And I think it blends them really, really nice rather than trying to stack it in your one dubbing loop. But that's just my personal opinion. Always brush it out, your fly after. I'm going to go ahead and take it out of the vise and hit this front section really good. I don't think I brushed it before we laid down that rabbit strip, but you can brush it out before that point. I'm going to brush it out now, and you can see how that really just allows that first piece to flow into that hook point, and going to lay down really nice. That is just awesome, and you can see how it moves. It's going to move a lot side to side and going to be really super durable and really, really awesome. But let's check out that UV Real quick, I'm going to throw it in the vise here, and I'm going to turn off my light. Oh man, check that out. That's wicked. Anyway, thanks for watching. The materials come in a bunch of different colors. Tie some up to match your local waters and what you have confidence in. So thanks for watching, and tie some up.